To call forward Rabbi Michael Talbis, the Rav of Kilas Zichron Mordechai, to recite the Perek of Tehillim, to recite the chapter of Psalms.
גם כי ילך ויצמו ואסלו יברו כי אתמדי שפט ומשנתך הנה רחמוני תארך לפני שולחן נגד סורוי בשנת ושם ראשי כפיר ביום אך טוב וחסד יתפוני כוי בחיוי ושאפתי בבייס ארנוי לאורך יומי.
Mentioned a moment ago that there are very significant limitations according to our tradition, according to halacha, as to what is possible right now, these days between Yom Kippur and Sukkot, number one, and of course, the Erev, the eve of the holiday in its own right. And one of those elements that will be missing are Hespedim. A brief explanation as to what we can and what we cannot do right now. We can't have Hespedim. The Gemara tells us in Masechta Brachos, Agra de Hespeda Diluye, that the essence and therefore the reward of Hespedim is crying, and that is incompatible with the spirit of the holiday that is already upon us. What we can do, and therefore what we must do, is to share words of tribute that don't evoke feelings beyond that which is unavoidable of grief, but words. We'll read Koheles, Ecclesiastes, less than a week from now, where it's written that when we come to a place such as we are right now to reflect on the life of an extraordinary woman, we can all learn very important lessons from the life, the remarkable life of Ruth Weiser. And so in the spirit of the Eshes Chayil that we just read, Kamu Vaneha Vayashruha, will call forth Ruth's sons, first Stanley and then Marty, to share words of appropriate tribute to their mother.
Emek, blessed is the judge, the true judge. How does one sum up 96 years of a beautiful life in a few minutes or a few paragraphs? Some of you knew my mother as Ruth or Ruthie or Rachel or Red. I, of course, knew her as Mom, but much of the world knew her simply as Baba. And truly, she was everyone's Baba. She always laughed when I would introduce her as my former womb mate, because for 9 months we shared a womb. Of course, it was her womb and I was just along for the ride. She was the glue that held the scattered family together. She had 2 children, 9 grandchildren, and 25 great-grandchildren. And up to the end, she knew the names of every one of them, who they belonged to, and what was happening in each of their lives. She was never happier than when she saw pictures or watched the videos of her great-grandchildren. She was a silent benefactor to those of the family who needed a hand or a little extra money for a holiday. wasn't until very recently that I learned how much she did for so many of her siblings, in-laws, nieces, nephews, and others. None of them ever asked for anything, but Mom knew their needs and took care of them without making a big deal of it or even telling anyone what she was doing or had done. I doubt that anyone knew everything that she did for the family. I fondly remember when Dad's aunt, uncle, and their little boy needed a place to stay for a few weeks when they were between houses. It was in the 50s. We lived in a small 2-bedroom, 1-bath house in Teaneck at the time, but she took them in, even though the only place for them was an unfinished attic. When I was in high school, we moved to a larger house. It was a block from the Teaneck Jewish Center, and we never knew who we would find sleeping on the couch on the afternoon that Yom Kippur. I have many, many, many fond memories of her in years gone by. The things she did, the things she taught me, not in academic sense, but by doing and showing and just living the life she lived. She had no daughters, so I was, in a way, the surrogate daughter. She taught me essential skills of life, how to knit, and play mahjong. Every Jewish holiday, it was my job to set the table, often for 20 or 25 people. Never a Hanukkah went by without a big family party. In every life, there are incidents one remember, pinpoints of experience that stand out from all the day-to-day happenings. For example, I was not very studious. That was my brother's lesson. Early in elementary school, it must have been 2nd or 3rd grade, my teacher must have had a conference with my mom, because Mom sat me down with my friend and made us sit there until we memorized the list of 10 inventions and their respective inventors for a test to be held the next day. I can't recall any other time when she intervened in my schoolwork, although I'm sure she did regularly. She was a teacher, not in the traditional formal sense, but in her attitude and in the way she lived. Growing up, our family was religiously conservative. Mom was the renegade in her family because she married outside of her religion. Conservative, and not an Orthodox one. But she made the holidays Jewish for Dad's side of the family. We always had 20 or 25 people for each Pesach Seder. They were family and some friends in the family, and they were introduced to the tradition and customs of the holiday. I suspect it was primarily her example that influenced her best friend's husband to convert to Judaism. But what I am most proud of is Mom's relationship with my wife. She was truly a mom to Charlie. I'm sure it was not always easy, especially in the early years. You see, when we started going together, Charlie was not Jewish. I know that no Jewish mother wants to see her son dating a non-Jew, and it was not easy for me to tell her about Charlie. But Mom's reaction was not what I expected. She accepted Charlie because she was dating her son. I suspect that privately she had other feelings, but she never expressed them to me or to Charlie. I'll never know for sure. Mom welcomed Charlie into her home, and through her example, taught Charlie how to be Jewish. Through her example, over a number of years, Charlie came to appreciate our religion and values, eventually converting. I can assure you that I never asked her to convert or encouraged her in any way. It can only be Mom's example of what a Jewish woman of valor is and does that convinced Charlie to take the life-changing step. Now our friends come to Charlie when they have questions about Yiddishkeit. Every time Charlie lights candles or makes a bracha, I see Mom's influence, and I'm reminding of how it changed Charlie's life. Mom had a great sense of humor and loved it when Dad, Marty, and I would sit at the dinner table stretching out a series of bad puns. As kids, Marty and I contrived much mischief. Mom always said that what trouble Marty and I didn't think of, my father would teach us. Mom made friends wherever she went. She was constantly starting conversations with strangers who were no longer strangers after the first 5 minutes, a trait that I seem to have inherited. Mom, there will never be another one like you. We will miss you. We love you. May your memory be for a blessing. Stan also left out that he was the baker in the family. That's the mom's influence. Mom, I asked Mechila for my failings of kavod, all the times that I may have disappointed you, and the times I hurt your feelings. Everyone in your enormous sphere of influence and contacts considered you a counselor. Frequently, on the most intimate life and certainly love challenges. Your life experiences, too many and varied to convey in brief words, gave you the credentials. Many have emailed me saying something like, when all around them was chaos or tsuris, Mom, you gave them stability, perspective, wisdom, and non-judgmental love. Because of you, our house growing up in Teaneck had an open door to all. My friends, both local and out of town, knew they could visit anytime, even unannounced. The Dorfs, the Leibowitz families, and neighbors would drop in, also unannounced. All knew how much Mom loved company. Equally amazing about Mom was her magnetic charisma. Her kind and uplifting words, even to strangers, as Stan said, we could be on a subway, on a line someplace, she would strike up conversations. It formed immediate bonds. Hashem gifted her with a cheerful disposition, an unending hakaras hatov, which means a sincere appreciation. Using those gifts was a mitzvah of her life. And how did Mom have such hakaras hatov, even in the most meager surroundings, and for even the slightest efforts by others to help her? She was born in Poland, but she grew up during the Depression on Fale Street in the South Bronx, in a small apartment with her parents, 3 siblings, and 2 unmarried aunts. She always shared a bed with her sister or with an aunt. When Dad, Olav Shalom, passed away in 1977, she was fortunate to find Jonas Weiser. Her marriage to Jonas in 1979 gave her 43 more years of sharing. Mom was a World War II bride at 18. They lived in a tiny apartment at a World War II Air Force base protecting Nevada. Water and food were scarce, but love was in abundance. She and Dad had a storybook romance. Sorry. Mom tried to sternly discipline Stan and me for our creative and constant mischief. I think her stern countenance was masking her inner laughter. We did some pretty funny things together. Thanks, Mom, for finding all those one-time babysitters. True. At the family furniture factory, Dad taught my big brother to drive the forklift and use the huge crosscut saw. Think of Tim Allen. But Mom, working in the office, taught the kid brother, that's me, about adding machines and bookkeeping, a love that lasted a professional lifetime. Until your incapacity 4 weeks ago, Mom, you were active and capable on your computer at age 96. I will miss our Zoom dates every Monday to do the Wall Street Journal crossword puzzle together. One other life lesson I learned from Mom. She nurtured, she prodded, she cajoled, and she charmed Stan and me to be independent. She provided the lift under our wings, and she knew how and when to let her fledglings fly on their own. Yesterday, davening Musaf near the end, near her bed, it was on Shabbos, her neshama was drifting away from us. I noted the line we say from Mishnah Tamid near the end of davening. Mizmor Shir, Yom HaShabbos, Mizmor Shir, La'atid Lavo, Liyom Shekulo Shabbos, U'Menucha L'Chayo Amamim, which means that Shabbos is a shir to come. That it's where a time when it will be constantly Shabbos of Menucha, of rest. 2 hours later, she left us to join that world. You will be with us forever. And I'd like to ask Rhonda to share a few words from the grandchildren, or great-grandchildren.
I'd like to read some thoughts of the grandchildren. Before I do, I want to ask Sheila, I have learned so much from you over the years. Your wonderful mitos of giving to everyone in whatever way you could, and your welcoming all to your home are mitos that I always try to everyone. We feel so blessed to have had Baba in our lives, in our children's lives for such a long time. As the Talmud asks about elderly sages, we also ask, what was the secret? How did Baba merit such longevity? One of God's forms of interaction with the world is that he is like a shadow. He mimics our behavior based on how we act. God responds in kind. Throughout her life, Baba was dedicated to others. She took care of relatives, especially those who had no one else to care for them. Despite hard times in her own life, she always looked to see how she could assist others, physically, emotionally, or monetarily. Maybe for this reason, God was her guardian. He shadowed Baba. Perhaps it is because she invested in such care in others, and he invested so much in her. Hashem needed Baba here because she was caring for so many of his children. Lastly, it bears mentioning that it always made Baba so happy to hear that we siblings were close to one another. She would literally clap out of joy when I would tell her that the grandchildren and great-grandchildren got together for a Holomoid outing or the like. Baba, we will continue to stay close with one another and make family and family relationships a supreme priority in our lives. Baba was to me what every kid could ever want from a grandmother. She was there for all the big events. She always had cookies in the ready. She brightened up my day with her generous spirit. And at just the right time, she shared the type of wisdom that can only come from experience. She was my link to our family heritage. She was a fountain of rich information about so many people in our family. She spoke about them in living color and always seemed to capture the essence of each personality to make me feel like I knew them as she talked. All the tantas and the people from the old days were alive in Baba's mind and decorated her annual calendar because she connected to them. This was most amplified when she talked about Grandpa Lee. Baba's animated face was one of an 18-year-old girl caught up in the whirlwind of love once again. I was transported to a different time before I was born each time she talked about him. Her love of people and of giving was so genuine that she connected us to the past in a way that was penetrating and real. I have so many special memories with her. Anyone who interacted with her immediately felt her positivity and warmth. She was someone who really had this. Love this her very much.
Just before we begin the mitzvah of Kura, of burial, some very brief reflections. Ruth's Hebrew name was Rachel Miriam, but I and so many here knew her as Ruth. And that seemed particularly fitting given the biblical context of what that name means, and a certain inimitable synthesis that I found, and so many others did, in her as well. You just heard, nobody can give better testimony in this context than the family. You just heard about Ruth's giving nature. In the Bible, the figure Ruth is associated with absolutely selfless giving and giving, chesed and kindness. Ruth was constitutionally incapable of turning people away when they had a legitimate need. She simply wasn't capable of that. But what was so remarkable to me about Ruth was the combination of this midah, of this character trait of giving and softness and compassion on the one hand, with, on the other, an absolute tenacity, an absolute unyielding tenacity when it came to defending her family, her community, her Yiddishkeit. And that too, we find in Ruth. The verse tells us that when Naomi saw that Ruth was committed to something, she stopped trying to discourage her because it would be of no use. When there was a value at stake for Ruth, so that was not negotiable. And she made that very, very clear to me on multiple occasions. Her family, her community, her Yiddishkeit. When I was turning on the Zoom that's allowing so many people to participate right now, it was almost a surreal experience for me, because the Zoom channel that we're on is a Zoom that Ruth Weiser was on more than anybody else, possibly more than anybody else in aggregate. Allow me to explain. Jonas, obviously during COVID, when we couldn't have a minyan, but we would still get together over Zoom to daven what we could. And then afterwards, when he wasn't able to return, and then when they went to Florida and it wasn't possible for him to have a minyan, but at least the opportunity to hear Tefillah B'tzibur, to answer Dvarim Shebikdusha was so important to him that Ruth signed on 3 times a day. And I see all these names coming on, and I'm thinking to myself, Ruth Weiser, she was always the first. Every time I turned on the Zoom, there was her name, because it was important to Jonas. And every time before we would start davening, the Talmud has all kinds of different opinions. How does one enter davening? I didn't have a choice, because Ruth would get in a few questions. How's this one doing? How's that one doing? Physical distance could be no barrier when it came to continuing to care for the people in the community. A very brief explanation as to why the Shiva will be so brief, not because I'm interested in engaging in a Talmudic discourse, but I simply want to highlight one element of Ruth's character. And then we'll continue with the burial. Unlike Shabbos, which is compatible to a degree with mourning, the mourning retreats into privacy, what we call Avelos B'tzina. So the halacha determines that the experience of joy on the festival, Simchas HaMoadim, is fundamentally incompatible with Avelos, with mourning. The Rav, Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik, explained it in the following way. He said, the essence of joy on the holiday is, as the verse says, and you shall rejoice before the Lord your God. The essence of Avelos is a sense of Hester Panim, is a sense of being alienated from God, or as the Rav put it in his Latin, Deus absconditus, that God is at a distance. So it can't be both Lifnei Hashem and Hester Panim. So the question is, which one should yield to the other? It's not obvious. Should a person, those first degree relatives, should they continue on in mourning, or should they practice the mitzvah of rejoicing on the festival? Which one is it? That they're not compatible, one must yield to the other. When the Talmud explains that indeed mourning must yield, even if it's only for an hour, or half hour, or 5 minutes, or however much time we have before the festival comes, mourning must yield to the festival. The Talmud says, Yavo aseh derabim v'yidcha aseh diyachid, because let the mitzvah of the community come and supersede the mandate of the individual. Yavo aseh derabim, let the needs of the community supersede the needs of the individual. Yavo aseh derabim, let 96 plus years of a person putting the rabbim in front of themselves, a girl who knew what it meant to share a bed, who treated my children and all of the children in shul as if they were her own great-grandchildren, as if she didn't have enough members of her family to worry about, who told me time and again, Rabbi, your job is to worry about the community. You have to worry about the community, That's your responsibility. Yavo aseh derabim. Let 96 plus years of a woman who gave to the community return to her maker, and let that mitzvah, as difficult as it is for all of us, supersede the aseh diyachid, the personal experience. I can think of no halacha that is a better microcosm of the remarkable woman to whom we pay a final tribute, the Kavod Acharon. When I got the call from Marty and then Jonas, literally one after the other, last night I was sitting with a Bible open in front of me, reading the first verses of the Torah portion that we're about to come to. There won't be one this Sabbath, but there will be one in conjunction with finishing the Torah. The last portion of the Torah, Bezos HaBracha, the verse, literally the words that I was reading were, Af Chovev Amim, that God, He loved maybe all of the nations, Kol Kedoshav Biyadecha, but He has taken His holy ones back into His hand. Those were the words I was reading when Marty called. Indeed, Kol Kedoshav Biyadecha, He has retrieved one of the Kedoshim on Erev Chag HaSukkos to spend the holiday in the celestial sukkah within the sheltering presence of the clouds of glory of His Ananei Kavod, reserved for those who live a life of such giving and kindness on the one hand, such fierceness and tenacity on the other, in defense of values that matter. May the memory of Ruth Weiser be an inspiration for us and an elevation for her family and for our community. As you heard from the family, we now ask, take a quiet moment before we begin the mitzvah of Kibura, at least for me personally, to ask Mechila of Ruth for anything that we did or perhaps didn't do that would have been more consistent with her stature and her dignity. Just a reminder, customary for us in Kibura is that we do not pass the shovels that we have here from one person to the next. And for the first few putting the earth back into the kever, into the grave, we we don't shovel in the regular way, but we do it with a change. We do it backwards to show that as important as this mitzvah is, it's also very solemn for us. And so I'll ask the members of the family to please come forward, and we'll proceed with the mitzvah. Ask members of the family and the community to please come forward and continue. We're going to end the Zoom broadcast now, as we're going to be concluding the Kavura. We thank everybody for paying Kavod Acharon to Ruth and for joining us.